Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video, we're going to cover everything you need to know to score high on the TOEFL listening section. We'll start with a quick overview of what this section looks like. Then we'll go over important tips and strategies, beginning with the basics and moving on to more advanced techniques. After that, equipped with all that knowledge, we'll take 3 complete listening tests and bonus lectures where I'll show you how to answer questions and take notes effectively without panicking. If you're struggling with the listening section and can't get the score you want, feel free to join our TOEFL course. We'll work on your note-taking skills, cover essential vocabulary for the listening section, and analyze TOEFL lectures and conversations together. This way, you'll know exactly how to achieve a higher score and ensure you're fully prepared for the test in a fast and effective way. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know your target listening score in the comments. Let's dive in. Top 10 tips for conquering the TOEFL listening section. Tip number 1 is to determine your listening level, as this is a crucial step in creating your TOEFL listening study plan. To do this, take 2 or 3 listening practice tests from the ETS website and calculate your average score. According to the ETS website, if your score is between 22 and 30, your listening level is advanced. If it's between 17 and 21, your level is like high intermediate. If your score is between 9 and 16, you're at a low intermediate level. And if your average score is between 0 and 8, your listening level is below low intermediate. For those of you whose listening level is advanced, include 2 things in your listening study plan. First, review the different types of questions. Second, practice the TOEFL test regularly to familiarize yourself with their structure and to hone your listening skills. If your listening level is high intermediate, low intermediate, or below, I recommend that you work on improving your listening skills with dictation before attempting to work with different types of questions. We'll talk about how to do that later in this video. Keep in mind that this distinction is based on the idea that your desired TOEFL score is 100 or higher. If your university only requires 80, a high intermediate score may be enough to start practicing with actual TOEFL tests and skip the dictation. Now, tip number 2. Improve your listening skills by practicing dictation. Dictation practice involves listening to spoken sentences or passages and writing down what you hear. This practice improves listening accuracy, concentration, and understanding of sentence structure and grammar. A great resource for dictation practice is the Daily Dictation website. They offer dictation exercises on a variety of topics and levels, including TOEFL listening. For those who have a high intermediate level, I suggest practicing with the TOEFL listening dictation exercises. For those who have a low intermediate level or below, start with short stories, daily conversations, or TOEIC listening, and gradually build up your listening skills before moving on to TOEFL listening. Tip number 3 is to improve your understanding of academic topics and college subjects. The listening section of the TOEFL covers a wide variety of subjects, including science, art, history, social sciences, and education. Unless you attended a high school or college where all classes were taught in English, you may find most of these subjects quite challenging, especially biology or geography lectures. Identify your problem areas and watch videos on YouTube specifically for these subjects. I especially recommend the Crash Course YouTube channel, as they have playlists with multiple videos dedicated to the most common school topics. Watch subtitle videos first to get used to hearing difficult words. A nice bonus: watching subtitle videos will also improve your speed reading skills, which is crucial for the reading section. Write down key vocabulary related to the topic. Later, watch the same videos without subtitles. Another good idea is to watch movies or TV shows that are set in school or college. This will help you pick up a lot of college-related vocabulary, which is also essential for the listening section. Tip number 4. Practice the art of note-taking. Do you know why college admission requires foreign students to have a certain level of TOEFL scores? It is to ensure that they will be able to participate in college life. One of their goals is to test a student's ability to take notes during a lecture. As a result, most recordings contain a lot of information that you won't be able to remember in the end. This makes taking notes quickly and efficiently one of the key skills for passing the listening section. Use the following abbreviations and symbols to help you take notes more quickly, or come up with your own alternatives. For those of you taking the test at home, practice taking notes specifically on a whiteboard with a marker. This is crucial for the listening section. And I cannot stress enough how important it is. Tip number 5, track your progress. Make sure you write down all your test scores to see if you're improving or not. Not only will this motivate you to try harder, but it will also help you to calculate your average score right before you take the test. Also, write down new vocabulary and keep it in one place. This can be a real notebook or notes on your phone. Seeing how many new words you have already learned is extremely rewarding, and keeping them in one place makes reviewing them much more convenient. Tip number 6. Learn to identify different question types. As I've mentioned before, there are 8 of them. Gist content, gist purpose, detail, function, attitude, organization, connecting content, inference. It is important to recognize them because the more you understand each type of question and how to approach it, the more likely you are to answer correctly in the listening section. In our intensive TOEFL course, we go over each of these types of questions and the strategies for answering them. We'll master the structure of the test, delve into reading section techniques, and study speaking and writing templates to ensure you get the score you want. Let's take this journey together and achieve your TOEFL goals. Click the link below to enroll now and take the first step towards your dream score. Tip number 7, learn to manage your time. The TOEFL listening section consists of multiple choice questions, which often cause students to hesitate before choosing the right option. However, time is limited. According to the EDS website, the entire TOEFL listening test takes 36 minutes to complete and consists of 2 conversations and 3 lectures, with a total of 28 questions. Each conversation lasts 3 minutes, while each lecture lasts 3 to 5 minutes. Let's do the math. Your total listening time will be between 15 and 21 minutes, depending on the length of the lectures. This means that you'll have between 15 and 21 minutes to answer the questions. With a total of 28 questions, you'll have approximately 54 to 75 seconds per question. During this time, you should read the question and answer choices. Check your notes if necessary, eliminate 2 incorrect answer choices, and select the correct answer. As you practice, I recommend that you try to spend about 50 seconds on each question to learn to skim questions and their answer options. If you can't find the correct answer in that time, randomly choose the correct answer from the remaining 2 options and move on to the next question. Tip number 8, don't take your eyes off the screen or off your notes. In fact, it is so easy to get distracted while listening, especially when it comes to lectures. To stay focused, don't take your eyes off the screen or off your notes. This sounds simple, but it's actually quite difficult to do, especially when you're stressed. Another way to stay focused is to take notes and listen for transitions and signal words, as they often tell you what is coming next. Tip number 9, analyze listening transcripts. To take notes effectively, you need to understand the structure of conversations and lectures. Take the time to analyze the transcripts of every practice test you take. This is especially true for lectures, which are usually more difficult to follow. Pay attention to how the ideas in the lecture are connected. Think of yourself as a professor giving the lecture. How would you organize it? What would come first? What would come second? How would you explain a difficult concept to someone who does not understand it? Look for cause and effect and compare and contrast relationships in the transcripts. Pay special attention to transitional and signal words by analyzing their function in the text. And finally, tip number 10, get professional help. You can undoubtedly do a lot of work on your own and get good results. However, if you need to get a high score or are pressed for time, consider our course Get 100 or Above on TOEFL to get the results you want faster and in a less stressful way. When it comes to the listening section of the TOEFL test, students either handle it with ease or struggle a lot. Some common complaints I've heard in my teaching practice include, I can't catch all the details in academic lectures. I know all the words when I read the transcript, but when I listen, I can't understand the speakers. They speak so fast. I understand everything in lectures, but I still make a lot of mistakes when answering questions. How can you avoid these problems? Let's find out. Here are 10 essential tips to help you excel on TOEFL listening. Tip number 1, familiarize yourself with the format. When I say familiarize yourself with the format, I don't just mean the general structure. We all know that you're going to hear 2 conversations and 3 lectures, that you're going to have 5 questions for each conversation and 6 questions for each lecture. What I mean is that you need to truly understand how each lecture or conversation is organized. You need to know what to expect, what questions will be asked, what the purpose of those questions is, what skills will be tested, and so on. How can you achieve that? Through practice and analysis. Don't just go from section to section. Instead, take time to stop, think about the question, think about the structure of the recording, and analyze your mistakes. Once you've analyzed at least 10 lectures and conversations, you'll see huge improvements. After having listened to tons of lectures and conversations, I can now pretty much guess the questions that will follow while still listening. Tip number 2, take notes to stay focused. In the previous video on listening, I mentioned the importance of taking notes, but I often get questions about how to do it, what to include, and whether notes are necessary. Taking notes is a must, but how you do it is very subjective. So far, I've seen 2 types of students. Some write down a lot of information, myself included. Others prefer less because more distracts them. Keep in mind that not taking notes at all is not a good option. Why not? Unless you have phenomenal memory, it's difficult to remember all the details of, let's say, a long academic lecture on geology. Notes help you stay focused and capture important details that can make all the difference when answering questions. Yes, you may understand almost everything or remember a lot, but when you have detailed questions or are asked about tiny details, it's better to have your notes to help you. For example, after a lecture on geology, you might be asked to put the steps of the basal sliding process in the correct order. Or see a question, what factors are involved in the amount of deformation a glacier undergoes? As you can see, it's difficult to remember the answers to these questions, along with a lot of other information if you don't take notes. And remember, the first and most important reason to take notes is to avoid distractions. When you write, you're focused on the lecture. Whereas if you don't, your mind might start to wander by the 2nd or 3rd minute. So yes, notes are important. And yes, you should write a lot. But how much is a lot in your particular case is something you should decide for yourself. If you feel that notes are starting to distract you, cut them down a bit. Tip number 3, work on writing speed. This tip ties in with the previous one. If you find note-taking distracting, it may be because you're a slow writer. In that case, practice speed writing. Note that I'm talking about speed writing, not speed typing. There is a lot of advice online on how to improve this. Some basic tips are to hold your pen comfortably, keep letters small, tall, and thin, and maintain good posture. Also, check out the arm movement method. It's a game changer when done right. Believe it or not, your listening score can depend on your handwriting speed, so it's worth preparing in advance. Tip number 4, recognize main ideas versus details. The lectures are designed to overwhelm you with information, but you don't need to memorize every single thing. This is why I told you in the first tip to really get to know the listening section. Knowing what questions are likely to come up will make it easier to filter out what's important. Remember that even though the TOEFL listening section tests your understanding of specific points, it doesn't go into too much detail. So don't expect questions like, what year did this event take place? Tip number 5, pay attention to tone and attitude.
Tone and attitude are important in understanding the speaker's intent, so always pay attention to how the speakers are feeling, whether they're excited, skeptical, sad, frustrated, and so on. I sometimes add these emotions to my notes by writing S for student, frustrated, or P for professor, excited. Also, practice identifying attitudes from subtle cues in speech. This is important because you'll often be asked, "Why does the professor say this?" And then a short part of the recording with the phrase will be played. This is where subtle cues in speech become crucial. Tip number 6. Eliminate wrong answers on tough questions. As with the reading section, if you're unsure of the answer, start by eliminating choices that are too broad, too specific, or irrelevant. For example, if a question asks, "Why does the professor say this?" and one choice says, "The professor thinks the student's idea is stupid," that's definitely wrong. TOEFL would never make such an answer the correct one. So elimination helps you narrow down your options and find the right answer. Tip number 7. Get used to spoken contractions. One of the reasons you often understand transcripts but don't catch all the details in lectures and conversations is that native speakers don't speak like this. "We met in our house." Instead, they might say, "We met in our house." "We met in our house." As you can see, that's a little different. Contractions like could've or would've are common in conversations and lectures on the TOEFL test. Recognizing them will make it easier to follow the flow of natural speech. Also, if you're familiar with contractions, your brain doesn't have to work as hard to process the speech. For example, if you immediately recognize "there" as "they are," you can focus more on understanding the overall meaning instead of mentally expanding each contraction. I'm thinking of creating a separate video on contractions and how they're used on the TOEFL test. So feel free to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon to not miss it. Tip number 8. Study campus vocabulary. This is a must. In my one-on-one lessons, I always teach campus-related vocabulary because it's so helpful for understanding conversations. If you don't know words like major, residence halls, dorms, bunk beds, electives, transfer, credits, and so on, it will be difficult for you to follow campus conversations and even some lectures. So make sure you study this vocabulary and you'll see how quickly your score will change. This is what we do in our TOEFL course. We'll teach you all the important vocabulary you need to know, such as campus-related vocabulary, academic vocabulary, subjects like biology, archaeology, art, physics, and more. Discuss the types of listening questions and what to expect from each of them, and dissect a complete listening section so that you know what to include and what not to include in your notes to feel prepared and confident on test day. We'll also teach you high-scoring templates for speaking and writing, and make sure you get the score you want in the shortest time possible. I'm leaving the link below. Click on it to join our TOEFL community. Tip number 9. Listen to different accents. While the American accent is the most common, the TOEFL test may include speakers with British, Australian, or other accents. Check out what they say on the ETS website. The listening section includes native speaker English accents from North America, the UK, New Zealand, or Australia to better reflect the variety of accents you might encounter while studying abroad. You may not hear these accents every day, so find YouTube videos with different accents to familiarize yourself and avoid confusion. Tip number 10. Stay calm during long lectures. I usually have at least 5 one-on-one sessions a day, and most of them are TOEFL related. I've seen hundreds of students, and there are real problems. And believe me, in 60 or even 70% of the cases, a lot of their problems are related to their personal psychology and test anxiety. Once these two issues are resolved, their scores increase dramatically. The lectures in the listening section are deliberately long to test your concentration. As a result, many students panic and miss important points. You should never worry about missing a detail or two. Always focus on the main idea and stay calm throughout. We'll complete a full TOEFL listening section to test your listening skills and see how well you'd score if you took the test tomorrow. If you want to learn the templates that make up almost half of your answers
and allow you to score high on the speaking and writing, click on this link. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to get more tips and tricks about the test, and click the bell icon to be notified when the next video comes out. Now get your pens and pencils ready and let's begin. I've taken this test from the ETS platform. You can find the link to it down below. As we go, you'll listen to the recordings, then go through the questions for each of them. You'll have some time to think about your answers, and then the right answer will be revealed. This way, you won't need to wait until the end of the section to analyze your mistakes. I'll also share tips and tricks about the section and point out some important details. A few things to remember before we begin. While the TOEFL listening has never been considered extremely difficult, it's the section where students usually can't get consistent results. It usually happens because of a few reasons: poor listening skills, inability to stay focused for a long time, limited vocabulary, and poor note-taking. Based on what I see in one-on-one sessions, and that's the reason I love my one-on-one sessions so much, as they really help me get a perfect understanding of the typical problems most students have, an inability to focus and poor note-taking are the key issues. In the majority of cases, students understand conversations and lectures pretty well, but the problem is that they either don't write down enough information and then have problems answering some detailed questions. You'll see how important details are later in this video. Or they write down too much and lose track of the recording. It's important to know how to balance and organize your notes in an effective way to succeed. Let's find out what your major issue is. If you already know it, let me know in the comments. The first recording is a conversation between a student and a librarian. For conversations, organize your notes in 2 columns. So, I'll have a column S for the student's ideas and a column L for the librarian's ideas. As you take notes, use arrows and hyphens to organize information carefully. Don't write down single words. You won't understand them later. It's better to focus on collocations, which are groups of words. So instead of orientation, write down couldn't come orientation. Omit prepositions to write faster. You don't have to be grammatically correct. Let's go.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a librarian. Hi, I'm new here. I couldn't come to the student orientation, and I'm wondering if you can give me a few quick pointers about the library. I'd really appreciate it.
Sure, I'd be glad to. What's your major area of study?
Latin American literature.
Okay. Well, over here's the section where we have language, literature, and the arts. And if you go downstairs, you'll find the history section. Generally, the students who concentrate in Latin American literature find themselves researching in the history section a lot.
You're right. I'm a transfer student. I've already done a year at another university, so I know how the research can go. I spent a lot of time in the history section. So, how long can I borrow books for?
Our loan period is a month. Oh, I should also mention that we have an interlibrary loan service. If you need to get hold of a book that's not in our library, there's a truck that runs between our library and a few other public and university libraries in this area. It comes around 3 times a week.
Hey, that's great. At my last school, it could take a really long time to get the materials I needed. So when I had a project, I had to make a plan way in advance. This sounds much faster. Another thing I was wondering is there a place where I can bring my computer and hook it up?
Sure. There's a whole area here on the main floor where you can bring a laptop and plug it in for power. But on top of that, we also have a connection for the internet at every seat.
Nice. So I can do all the research I need to do right here in the library. I'll have all the resources, all the books and information I need right here in one place.
Yep, that's the idea. I'm sure you'll need photocopiers too. They're down the hallway to your left. We have a system where you have to use a copy card, so you'll need to buy a card from the front desk. You insert it into the machine and you're ready to make copies.
How much do you guys charge?
7 cents a copy.
Oh, that's not too bad. Thanks. Where's the collection of rare books?
Rare books are up on the 2nd floor. They're in a separate room where the temperature is controlled to preserve the old paper in them. You need to get special permission to access them, and then you have to wear gloves to handle them because the oils in our hands, can destroy the paper, and gloves prevent that. So we have a basket of gloves in the room.
Okay, thanks. I suppose that's all I need to know. You've been very helpful. Thanks.
Anytime. Bye.
Bye.
Time to answer the questions. 1. Why does the student come to the library? To learn about the library's resources. At the beginning of the conversation, he mentioned that he couldn't come to the orientation, so he wanted to learn a few things about the library. 2. Why does the librarian point out the history section to the student? She assumes that he'll need to do research there. She said that students with art majors usually focus on this section. For the record, a major is the main thing you study in college. Your major can be biology, art, physics, and so on. For conversations, you should know campus vocabulary. Once you study it, understanding the information will become a piece of cake for you. 3. What does the student imply about the interlibrary loan service at his last school? It was inconvenient. 4. What does the student need to do before he can use any rare books? He needs to obtain permission and put on gloves. As you can see, the questions are pretty detailed. So if you don't take notes and only rely on your memory, you might skip some important information and make mistakes. When you practice, make sure you always check if your notes help you figure out the right answer or not. If they don't, listen to the recording once again and adjust them. Question 5.
Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
I'll have all the resources, all the books and information I need right here in one place.
Yep, that's the idea.
Which sentence best expresses what the librarian means when she says this?
Yep, that's the idea.
If she says, yes, that's the idea, it means that is what we intended. These kinds of questions usually test your idiomatic vocabulary. As you practice more, you'll notice that many of these questions use some idiomatic expressions and then want you to figure out what they mean. So the second type of vocabulary to brush up on is idiomatic vocabulary. Congrats! We've finished the first task. Let's move on to the lecture. For lectures, organize information in blocks. Create lists and make spaces between these blocks to help you understand your notes better. It also helps you to get a deeper understanding of the lectures as you go. This lecture is about the theater.
Listen to part of a lecture in a class on theater history. The professor is discussing the theater of 19th century France.
The 19th century was the time that saw what we call realism develop in the European theater. To understand this, though, we first need to look at an earlier form of drama known as the well-made play, which basically was a pattern for constructing plays. Plays that, beginning with some early 19th century comedies in France, proved very successful commercially. The dramatic devices used here weren't actually anything new. They'd been around for centuries. But the formula for a well-made play required that certain of these elements be included in a particular order, and most importantly, that everything in the play be logically connected. In fact, some of these playwrights would start by writing the end of a play and work backward toward the beginning, just to make sure each event led logically from what had gone before. Okay, so what are the necessary elements of a well-made play? Well, the first is logical exposition. Exposition is whatever background information you have to reveal to the audience so they'll understand what's going on. Before this time, exposition might have come from actors simply giving speeches. Someone might walk out on a stage and say, "In fair Verona, where we lay our scene," and then tell all about the feuding families of Romeo and Juliet. But for the well-made play, Even the exposition had to be logical, believable. So, for example, you might have two servants gossiping as they're cleaning the house, and one says, "Oh, what a shame the master's son is still not married." And the other might mention a rumor about a mysterious gentleman who's just moved into town with his beautiful daughter. These comments are part of the play's logical exposition. The next key element of a well-made play is referred to as the inciting incident. After we have the background information, we need a key moment that gets things moving, that really makes the audience interested in what happens to the characters we just heard about. So, for example, after the two servants reveal all this background information, we meet the young man, just as he first lays eyes on the beautiful young woman and immediately falls in love. This is the inciting incident. It sets off the plot of the play. Now, the plot of a well-made play is usually driven by secrets, things that the audience knows, but the characters often don't know. So, for example, the audience learns through a letter or through someone else's conversation who this mysterious gentleman is and why he left the town many years before. But the young man doesn't know about this. And the woman doesn't understand the ancient connection between her family and his. And before the secrets are revealed to the main characters, the plot of the play proceeds as a series of sort of up and down moments. For example, the woman first appears not to even notice the young man, and it seems to him like the end of the world. But then he learns that she actually wants to meet him too. So life is wonderful. Then if he tries to talk with her, maybe her father gets furious for no apparent reason, so they can't see each other. But just as the young man has almost lost all hope, he finds out, well, you get the idea. The reversals of fortune continue, increasing the audience's tension and excitement, making them wonder if everything's going to come out okay or not. Next comes an element known as the obligatory scene. It's a scene, a moment, in which all the secrets are revealed, and generally things turn out well for the hero and others we care about. A happy ending of some sort. This became so popular that a playwright almost had to include it in every play, which is why it's called the obligatory scene. And that's followed by the final dramatic element, the denouement, or the resolution, when all the loose ends have to be tied up in a logical way. Remember, the obligatory scene gives the audience emotional pleasure, but the denouement offers the audience a logical conclusion. That's the subtle distinction we need to try very hard to keep in mind. So, as I said, the well-made play, this form of playwriting, became the basis for realism in drama and for a lot of very popular 19th century plays. And also a pattern we find in the plots of many later plays and even movies that we see today.
Time to answer the questions. Number 1, what is the lecture mainly about? This is the question you'll get asked after every lecture. The right answer is usually something that was discussed the most. In this case, successful standard formula for writing plays. Note that it's not a famous example of a well-made play. They're talking about plays in general. 2. According to the professor, why did some playwrights write the end of a play before the beginning? To ensure that the plot would develop in a logical manner. If you didn't catch this in the recording, feel free to use logic. Why would you write the end of a play before the beginning? Probably so that you already know how things will turn out at the end and can organize the events in the play logically. Also, feel free to always start by eliminating the 2 options that are definitely incorrect. Then you can choose between the remaining 2. 3. Why does the professor mention a conversation between two servants? To show how background information might be revealed in a well-made play. 4. According to the professor, what dramatic elements are typically included in a well-made play to help move the plot forward? A series of major changes in the hero's apparent chances of success, and information known to the audience, but not to the main characters. Again, always check your notes for such details. The professor said that the plot is usually driven by secrets, and there is a series of ups and downs. In the lecture, he made an example of when the woman in the play doesn't notice the man at first, and then he learns that she wants to meet him, and then he tries to talk to her, but her father gets furious all of a sudden. These are ups and downs in the play. 5. What does the professor imply about the obligatory scene and the denouement? The difference between them might be unclear to some people. 6.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
This is the inciting incident. It sets off the plot of the play.
Why does the professor say this?
It sets off the plot of the play.
This is the inciting incident. It sets off the plot of the play. Of course, that's the definition of the term. So the right answer is to help students understand the meaning of a new term. Good. One more task done. Time for another conversation.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a business professor.
So, Richard, what's up?
Well, I know we have a test coming up on chapters,
Chapters 3 and 4 from your textbook.
right, 3 and 4. Well, I didn't get something you said in class Monday.
All right. Do you remember what it was about?
Yeah, you were talking about a gym, a health club where people can go to exercise, that kind of thing.
Okay. But the health club model is actually from chapter 5. So,
Oh, chapter 5. Oh, so it's not... Okay, but I guess I still want to try to understand.
oh, of course. Well, I was talking about an issue in strategic marketing. The health club model. With a health club, you might think they would have trouble attracting customers, right?
Well, I know when I pass by a health club and I see all those people working out, the exercising, I just as soon walk on by.
Yeah, there's that. Plus, lots of people have exercise equipment at home, or they can play sports with their friends, right?
Sure.
But nowadays, in spite of all that, and expensive membership fees, health clubs are hugely popular. So how come?
I guess that's what I didn't understand.
Okay. Basically, they have to offer things that most people can't find anywhere else. You know, quality. That means better exercise equipment, high-end stuff, and classes, exercise classes, maybe aerobics.
I'm not sure if I... Okay, I get it. Yeah. And another thing is, I think people probably feel good about themselves when they're at the gym. And they can meet new people, socialize.
Right. So health clubs offer high-quality facilities, and also they sell an image about people having more fun, relating better to others, and improving their own lives if they become members.
Sure, that makes sense.
Well then, can you think of another business or organization that could benefit from doing this? Think about an important building on campus here. Something everyone uses. A major source of information.
You mean like an administrative building?
Well, that's not what I had in mind.
Oh, you mean the library?
Exactly. Libraries. Imagine public libraries. They're an information resource for the whole community, right?
Well, they can be. But now with the internet and big bookstores, you can probably get what you need without going to a library.
Well, that's true. So, if you were the director of a public library, what would you do about that?
To get more people to stop in? Well, like you said, better equipment, maybe a super fast internet connection, and not just a good variety of books, but also like nice, comfortable areas where people can read and do research, things that make them want to come to the library and stay.
Great.
Oh, and maybe have authors come and do some readings, or, I don't know, special presentations, something people couldn't get at home.
Now you're getting it.
Thanks, Professor Wilkins. I think so too.
What is the conversation mainly about? A strategy for attracting customers. While the student first came to clarify some points for the upcoming test, the whole conversation was about ways to attract customers for different businesses. 2. What does the professor imply about the upcoming test? It will not contain questions about the health club model, because this information is from Chapter 5, which is not part of the test. 3. Based on the conversation, indicate whether each of the following is offered by health clubs. You see, this is what I was talking about when I said that the questions in this section are very detailed. And this is where a list of your notes would have come in handy. Low membership fees? No, they have high fees instead. High quality facilities? Yes. Exercise classes? Yes. Positive self-image? Yes. Special presentations? No. Presentations were mentioned when they talked about libraries. 4. What does the professor imply about public libraries? They need to give greater emphasis to strategic marketing. This is because they are not very popular today and have to work even harder to attract customers. 5.
Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
I mean, with a health club, you might think they would have trouble attracting customers, right?
Well, I know when I pass by a health club and I see all those people working out, exercising, I just as soon walk on by.
Why does the student say this?
Well, I know when I pass by a health club and I see all those people working out, exercising, I just as soon walk on by.
To give an example that supports the professor's point. Next lecture. This one is about geology, so stay focused. It might contain some more challenging vocabulary.
Listen to part of a lecture in a geology class.
Last time we started to talk about glaciers and how these masses of ice form from crystallized snow. And some of you were amazed at how huge some of these glaciers are. Now, even though it may be difficult to understand how a huge mass of ice can move, or flow is another word for it, it's really no secret that glaciers flow because of gravity. But how they flow, the way they flow, needs some explaining. Now, the first type of glacier flow is called basal slip. Basal slip, or sliding as it's often called, basically refers to the slipping or sliding of a glacier across bedrock, actually across a thin layer of water on top of the bedrock. So this process shouldn't be too hard to imagine. What happens is that the ice at the base of a glacier is under a great deal of pressure, the pressure coming from the weight of the overlying ice. And you probably know that under pressure, the melting temperature of water, of the ice, is reduced. So ice at the base of the glacier melts, even though it's below 0 degrees Celsius. And this results in a thin layer of water between the glacier and the ground. This layer of water reduces friction. It's like a lubricant, and it allows the glacier to slide or slip over the bedrock. Okay? Now, the next type of movement we'll talk about is called deformation. You already know that ice is brittle. If you hit it with a hammer, it'll shatter like glass. But ice is also plastic. It can change shape without breaking. If you leave, for example, a bar of ice supported only at one end, the unsupported end, will deform under its own weight. It'll kind of flatten out at one end, get distorted, deformed. Think of deformation as a very slow oozing. Depending on the stresses on the glacier, the ice crystals within it reorganize. And during this reorganization, the ice crystals realign in a way that allows them to slide past each other. And so the glacier oozes downhill without any ice actually melting. Now, there are a couple of factors that affect the amount of deformation that takes place or the speed of the glacier's movement. For example, deformation is more likely to occur the thicker the ice is because of the gravity of the weight of the ice. And temperature also plays a part here in that cold ice does not move as easily as ice that is closer to the melting point. In fact, it's not too different from the way oil is, thicker at lower temperatures. So if you have a glacier in a slightly warmer region, it will flow faster than a glacier in a cooler region. Okay, now I'd like to touch briefly on extension and compression. Your textbook includes these as types, as a particular type of glacier movement, but you'll see that there are as many textbooks that omit it as a type of movement as include it. And I might not include it right now if it weren't in your textbook. But basically, the upper parts of glaciers have less pressure on them, so they don't deform as easily. They tend to be more brittle. And crevasses can form in these upper layers of the glacier when the glacier comes into contact with bedrock walls or is otherwise under some kind of stress but can't deform quickly enough. So the ice will expand or constrict. And that can cause big fissures, big cracks to form in the surface layers of the ice. And that brittle surface ice moving is sometimes considered a type of glacial movement, depending on which source you're consulting. Now, as you probably know, glaciers generally move really slowly, but sometimes they experience surges. And during these surges, in some places, they can move at speeds as high as 7,000 meters per year. Now, speeds like that are pretty unusual, hundreds of times faster than the regular movement of glaciers, but you can actually see glaciers move during these surges, though it is rare.
Time to look at the questions. 1. What is the lecture mainly about? Explanations of how glaciers move. 2. The professor discusses the process of basal slip. Put the steps in the correct order. Again, a test of your note-taking skills. For processes, I usually write down lines with information connected by arrows. This helps write down things faster. Here, pressure is increased on the ice is number 1. A liquid layer forms at the base of the glacier is 2. Then, friction between the glacier and bedrock is reduced and the glacier begins to slide. Again, if you got it wrong, you need to adjust your notes. 3. What factors are involved in the amount of deformation a glacier undergoes? Thickness of glacial ice, the temperature of the glacial ice. 4. What does the professor say about the speed of glaciers? It can be fast enough for movement to be noticeable. 5.
What does the professor explain when he says this?
But ice is also plastic. It can change shape without breaking. If you leave, for example, a bar of ice supported only at one end, the unsupported end, will deform under its own weight.
A characteristic of ice that is related to glacial movement. 6. What does the professor imply about compression and extension? He's not convinced that it's a type of glacial movement. Finally, the last lecture is in the art class. There is an interesting observation I've made. Very often, lectures on humanities subjects have easier vocabulary, but contain a lot of details and have more complex questions. Lectures on sciences feature more challenging lexes instead, but have simpler questions. Have you noticed something like that when you practice? Let me know.
Listen to part of a lecture in an art history class.
We've been talking about the art world of the late 19th century in Paris, and today I'd like to look at the women who went to Paris at that time to become artists. Now, from your reading, what do you know about Paris, about the art world of Paris during the late 19th century?
People came from all over the world to study.
it had a lot of art schools and artists who taught painting. Our book mentions classes for women artists, and it was a good place to go to study art.
If you wanted to become an artist, Paris was not a good place to go. Paris was the place to go. And women could find skilled instructors there. Before the late 19th century, if women who wanted to become artists had to take private lessons or learn from family members. They had more limited options than men did. But around 1870, some artists in Paris began to offer classes for female students. These classes were for women only. And by the end of the 19th century, it became much more common for women and men to study together in the same classes. So within a few decades, things had changed significantly. Okay, let's back up again and talk about the time period from the 1860s to the 1880s and talk more about what happened in women's art classes. In 1868, a private art academy opened in Paris, and for decades it was probably the most famous private art school in the world. Its founder, Rodolphe Julien, was a canny businessman and quickly established his school as a premier destination for women artists. What he did was, after an initial trial period of mixed classes, he changed the school policy. He completely separated the men and women students.
Any reason why he did that?
Well, like I said, Julien was a brilliant businessman with progressive ideas. He saw that another small private art school, where all the students were women, was very popular at that time, and that's probably why he adopted the women-only classes. These classes were typically offered by established artists and were held in the studio, the place where they painted. This was a big deal because finally women could study art in a formal setting. And there was another benefit to the group setting of these classes. The classes included weekly criticism, and the teacher would rank the art of all the students in the class, from best to worst. How would you like it if I did that in this class?
No way.
But our textbook said that the competition was good for women. It helped them see where they needed to improve.
Isn't that interesting? One woman artist, her name was Marie Bashkirtseff. Bashkirtseff once wrote how she felt about a classmate's work. She thought her classmate's art was much better than her own, and it gave her an incentive to do better. Overall, the competition in the women's art classes gave women more confidence that they could also compete in the art world after their schooling. And even though Bashkirtseff couldn't study in the same classes as men, she was having an impact as an artist. Just look at the Salon. What do you know about the Salon?
It was a big exhibition, a big art show that they had in Paris every year. The art had to be accepted by judges.
It was a big deal. You could make a name for yourself.
You could have a painting or sculpture in the Salon and go back to your home country saying you'd been a success in Paris. It was sort of a seal of approval. It was a great encouragement for an artist's career. And by the last 2 decades of the 19th century, 1/5 of the paintings in the Salon were by women, much higher than in the past. In fact, Marie Bashkirtseff herself had a painting in the Salon in 1881. Interestingly, this masterpiece, called In the Studio, is a painting of the interior of Julien's art school. It's not in your textbook. I'll show you the painting next week. The painting depicts an active, crowded studio with women drawing and painting a live model. It was Bashkirtseff actually followed Julien's savvy suggestion and painted her fellow students in a class at the school with the artist herself at the far right. A great advertisement for the school when the painting eventually hung at the Salon, for a women's studio had never been painted before.
1. What is the lecture mainly about? how opportunities for women artists in Paris improved. This one is easy. They talked about opportunities for women artists a lot. 2. What point does the professor make about Julian when he mentions that Julian's art school offers some classes only for women? Julian possessed outstanding business skills. The lecturer called him a canny and brilliant businessman, so he has outstanding business skills. 3. What does the professor emphasize as one benefit of competition in women's classes? Women gained more confidence in their artistic abilities. 4. According to the professor, what were 2 ways that the situation of women artists had changed by the end of the 19th century in Paris? Women and men took art classes together. Women artists played a greater role in the salon exhibitions. 5. What does the professor imply about Bashkirtseff's painting in the studio? It was beneficial for both Bashkirtseff and the school where she studied. The professor mentioned that it was the first time when such a thing was done, which obviously made the school more popular. 6.
Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
It had a lot of art schools and artists who taught painting. Our book mentions classes for women artists, and it was a good place to go to study art.
If you wanted to become an artist, Paris was not a good place to go. Paris was the place to go.
What does the professor mean when he says this?
If you wanted to become an artist, Paris was not a good place to go. Paris was the place to go.
If the professor says Paris was the place to go, he means that Paris was the most important place for an artist to study and work. So, this was the listening section of the TOEFL test. Let me know which conversations and lectures were the hardest, and share how many correct answers you got overall. If you're currently preparing to take the test and need someone to evaluate your writing and speaking, sign up for our TOEFL course and schedule a consultation with me. Today we're going to do a complete TOEFL listening section and find out what your score will be on the day of the test. We'll listen to 2 conversations and 3 lectures and answer questions after each. Conversation 1.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a librarian.
Hi. I need to get into special collections, in particular the British literature. I was working with some of the William Blake books.
Well, then you must know that access is restricted.
I was in a seminar with Professor Gray, and she authorized access for us.
Oh, if that's the case, let me check. Right, yeah, but it looks like that expired at the end of last semester.
But I really need to get back in there. See, I didn't quite finish my project.
Aha, the plot thickens. Well, it's easy enough. Have Professor Gray authorize you again. You see, these editions are rare and shouldn't be handled more than necessary. Can you work from later editions or microfilm?
Not really. Actually, my project, well, it involves some annotations in the particular edition here. They haven't been reproduced because they're really not part of the text. You know, they generally clean them up. They're quite hard to see.
Well, often the characteristics of the manuscripts have been recorded. These types of extraneous markings might also be noted.
I don't think they are. They're very faint, and, well, I think I have a new angle on them. There was a study once a long time ago about these notes that everybody else has since taken for granted without checking for themselves. I think there might have been a mistake in the past, that they were misread.
So, get Professor Gray.
She's away this semester. I had to beg her to give me extra time on this project. I haven't even received a grade in the class yet, and this class is a prerequisite for other classes in my major. I really need to see those books so I can finish up this project and get back on course to graduate on time.
Everybody has special circumstances.
2 hours? 1 hour? I promise to be careful. I just need to look at a few pages with a strong magnifying glass.
Well, I can't let you in without authorization from your professor. Can you get in touch with her somehow?
Maybe she's checking her email. I really thought I'd be able to straighten this out without her. You know, she did me a huge favor by giving me the extra time. I feel like I'm skating on thin ice with her.
You know, you were lucky to have had permission to look at the books last semester. If we don't maintain our policies, they'll disintegrate.
I know. Would an email from her or a phone call be good enough?
Of course.
That's the end of the first conversation. Now it's time to answer the questions. As we go through them, you can pause the video if you need more time to think, and then I'll reveal the correct answer. You won't have this option on the day of the test, but I think it's the best way to practice. This way, you can analyze your mistakes on the spot.
What are the speakers mainly discussing?
The right answer is C. The student's request to visit a particular part of the library.
Why is the student unable to use later editions or reproductions of a book he mentions?
D is correct. Reproductions typically omit the specific material the student needs.
Why is the student reluctant to contact Professor Gray?
The right answer is B. He does not feel comfortable about asking her for another favor.
What does the woman imply about the rules regarding special collections?
B is correct. The rules are in place to protect the books.
Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
I really need to see those books so I can finish up this project and get back on course to graduate on time.
Everybody has special circumstances.
What does the woman mean when she says this?
Everybody has special circumstances.
When the woman says, everybody has special circumstances, she means that she's often heard this kind of story from students. So C is right. One part of the listening section covered. Congratulations! If you made any mistakes, be sure to analyze them. There are usually a couple of reasons for mistakes. First, your listening skills aren't up to par. In this case, you can use the Daily Dictation website to improve them. Second, you don't know the question types and what to listen for in the recordings. In this case, you should carefully study the listening question types and also analyze the transcripts. You can do this on this website. Third, you have problems with note-taking. This is the most common problem the TOEFL test takers have. In my one-on-one sessions, I often see students who have amazing listening skills and can understand lectures and conversations perfectly, but can't consistently get high scores on the listening section. So they take tests over and can't get their target score. If you feel that note-taking is not your strong point, enroll in the TOEFL prep course I created and go straight to the listening section block. We'll go over question types, discuss conversation and lecture notes, and do listening tests together. However, unlike this test, we'll also stop after each question and discuss why a certain answer is correct and how to avoid mistakes. The link is below. Let's move on to the first lecture.
Listen to part of a lecture in an education class. The professor is discussing the Italian educator, Maria Montessori.
Okay, if you did your reading for today, then you were introduced to a very influential alternative to traditional education. This educational philosophy and methodology was pioneered in Italy in the early 1900s by Dr. Maria Montessori. It's called the Montessori method. But what made the Montessori method for young children so different? What made it so different, so special?
It's based on very different ideas about how kids learn best, right?
Mm-hmm. It was groundbreaking. To begin with, unlike the traditional classrooms at the time, the Montessori classroom environment was more suited to the child. The furniture was child-sized. Well, it's that way in almost all schools now, but that wasn't always the case. We can thank Montessori for this. You won't see any long benches with children in rows or heavy desks that separate children. Children are free to interact with each other. And in Montessori classrooms, the furniture is lightweight, so children can move it around easily. And And having furniture and materials made to fit them makes kids feel more competent. This fits in with Montessori's notion of liberty and autonomy. Children are free to move around the room, and they learn to do things for themselves.
I'm not sure I get that part. It sounds like potential chaos.
Oh, no. Let's not confuse this liberty of activity with lack of discipline. In fact, teachers have to maintain this specific environment carefully through a number of rules, which are generally about respect and what's right. It's just that the child needs freedom of choice to develop independence and self-direction. Also, unlike what happens in most conventional classrooms, children choose their own activities. They may be guided by the teacher, but it's ultimately up to each child to select tasks, which brings us to the manipulative equipment you find in a Montessori classroom. Like little boards that have rough or smooth surfaces, or blocks that can be stacked into a tower. Now, this equipment was designed by Montessori over time with much experimentation, designed to help children teach themselves through playing.
Well, what do the teachers do? I mean, if the kids are teaching themselves.
That's a good question. To start, a child may not work with an activity until the teacher has demonstrated its proper use. Then the Montessori teacher's job is to observe the child's play, because when the children play, they're acquiring the basis for later concepts. So the teacher helps motivate and focus each child and monitors the child's progress, but does not interfere with the child's observations and deductions. That was, and still is, a novel idea, and for many teachers, not the easiest thing to do. In fact, for some it's very difficult. Montessori herself called the teacher a director. Remember, the independence of the learner lies at the heart of the Montessori methodology.
Okay. Yeah, it does seem like the teachers need a lot of training and patience.
True. As I said, it's not easy for a lot of teachers to step back like that. But getting back to the equipment, basic Montessori equipment can be divided into a number of major subject areas such as practical life, mathematics, and what is called sensorial. With the sensorial equipment, the children can explore things like sounds and textures. At the same time, they develop motor skills. But this apparent play is laying the groundwork for later math and language work. Now let's take a look at the materials called brown stairs. For a young child playing with these graduated blocks, these brown stairs, they are not just a sensorial lesson. By manipulating them, the child develops fine motor skills, and by sorting and classifying them by size, by weight, the child learns some basic mathematics. Similarly, with practical life equipment, the child can learn how to button a shirt, cut up an apple for a snack, and other real-world tasks.
With all this integration and real-world learning, is there any room for creativity?
Is creativity encouraged? Well, Montessori teachers wouldn't praise a child for using a violin as a baseball bat or for putting it on their head like a hat, but actually creativity comes through learning to play the violin, using the object for the purpose it was intended, and practical life exercises stress that.
How was that? Time to answer the questions.
What is the lecture mainly about?
The first question of every lecture is what it's about. It's important to remember that the main idea of the lecture is not always given at the beginning of the lecture. For example, in this lecture, the professor says that she's going to talk about Maria Montessori, which is not specific enough. But then she mentions that Montessori's approach was different, special, and groundbreaking. So simply put, it was different from the traditional approach. Then the professor gives examples of how different it was and explains why this method was better. This means that see how the Montessori method facilitates children's development is correct. If you have doubts about the right answer, you can always start by eliminating the options that are definitely wrong. For example, it's definitely not A or D. The lecture didn't discuss in detail how the children responded to the Montessori method, nor did it mention how Maria developed her educational method. Then, you'll just have to choose between B and C. By the way, the lecture mentioned conventional classroom, which is a synonym for traditional classroom. The word conventional appears quite often on the TOEFL test, so if you don't know it, feel free to add it to your vocabulary list. You can also watch this video where I discuss the most common words you'll need on the TOEFL.
What does the professor imply about the furniture that was traditionally found in children's classrooms in the early 1900s?
This question asks us about the furniture that was traditionally found in children's classrooms in the early 1900s. The right answers are A, C, and D. It did not encourage interaction among children. It was heavy and difficult for children to move, and it was not child-sized.
According to the professor, what is the primary goal of the Montessori teacher?
The primary goal of the Montessori teacher was to guide the child to learn skills and concepts independently, so D is correct. This may be a tricky question. The lecturer says that children must choose their own activities. Yes, they can be guided by the teacher, but they should be able to choose the tasks themselves. Then the lecturer says that the teacher's role is first to show children how to play, then watch them play, and monitor their progress without interfering. So the focus is on children's independence, which is why D is correct.
What is the professor's attitude about the Montessori teacher's role?
The right answer is C. She thinks it could be a difficult role to perform.
What does the example of the brown stairs demonstrate about Montessori classroom materials?
D is correct. That one set of materials can be used to introduce several skills. If you remember this part of the lecture, brown stairs were given as an example of sensorial equipment. The lecturer says that they help children develop fine motor skills and teach them basic math. When I checked my notes, I'd written something like this: brown stairs, motor skills, basic math. As you can see, effective notes are very important during the listening section, especially when it comes to lectures. They don't only help us to answer questions. Very often, you can choose the right answer because you have understood the lecture well. But taking notes also helps you stay focused and prevents your mind from wandering. If you've done even a few practice listening tests, you've probably noticed that when the lecture gets too long, you can easily lose concentration and skip some important details, even if it's just for a few seconds.
Why does the professor mention the violin?
Finally, the last question. A and D are correct. We've finished our first lecture. Congratulations! Now it's time to move on to the second conversation.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Oh, hi, Melanie. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. I just have some questions about this paper for your class. Do you have a second to talk about it now?
Oh, yes, no problem. I have about 20 minutes before my next class. Will that be enough time?
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so the thing is, I'm writing my paper on the history of jazz in New York City.
All right, well, that's a pretty broad subject.
Well, actually, I'm focusing on a specific decade, the 50s, and I'm only doing it on a few specific artists.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to say that seemed a bit, too ambitious for a 10-page paper.
Yeah. No, it's not the subject I'm having trouble with. Actually, the paper is practically writing itself. I mean, I've got a lot to say, and it's going pretty well. The thing is, I have this idea that might make it better, and I was wondering if there's any way I could get an extension. I mean, I know it's due next week, right?
That's right, on Monday. But I don't understand. It sounds like you're doing so well. Why do you need more time?
Yeah, well, I could write the paper as it is and turn it in on time, and it would be fine.
But...
But I was just talking to one of my friends whose family has lived in New York forever, and it turns out that her grandfather was actually there in the period of jazz I'm writing about. I mean, he was a jazz musician, and he actually, personally knew the artist I'm writing about.
You're kidding. Well, that's a coincidence.
Yeah, I know, it's cool, right? So anyway, that's why I was wondering if I could get an extension, because I thought it would be really great if I could, interview him for my paper.
Ah.
But I don't think I can meet with him until early next week, so...
Ah, I see. Well, it would certainly add a new dimension to your paper, wouldn't it? Have you talked to this gentleman yet?
No. But I talked to my friend, ran the idea past her, and she said he would probably love to do it. But, he's busy until next week.
Okay, well, yeah. I think that in this case, we can definitely extend your deadline until, let's say, Friday next week.
Okay, that would be great.
But just to be fair, why don't you turn in an outline of your paper on the due date?
The outline? Oh, that's no problem. It's basically done, except for the parts about the interview.
Oh, yeah, the interview. Could you have the questions ready then, too? The ones you're planning on asking?
Sure, yeah. I can do that, too.
And then I'll expect the final draft next Friday.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Sure, I'm looking forward to reading it.
Why does the student go to see the professor?
D is correct. The student goes to the professor to ask for more time to finish her paper. As you can see, it's also great to know campus vocabulary for conversations. In our TOEFL course, we have a list of this vocabulary because it's difficult to follow many conversations without it. For example, you should know words like get an extension, due date, turn in your assignment, and so on.
What can be inferred about the student's work on her paper so far?
B is the right answer. She's found enough information to complete the paper.
Why does the student want to interview her friend's grandfather?
The right answer is D. He was a jazz musician during the 1950s.
What does the professor ask the student to do on the original due date of the paper?
Here, B and C are correct. Again, you might be tempted to choose A because you heard the verb to turn in. However, the professor says that she should turn in the outline of her paper, not the first draft. So B and C are the correct answers.
Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
Okay, so the thing is, I'm writing my paper on the history of jazz in New York City.
All right, well, that's a pretty broad subject.
Well, actually, I'm focusing on a specific decade, the 50s.
Why does the student say this?
Well, actually, I'm focusing on a specific decade.
The student says, well, actually, I'm focusing on a specific decade to address the professor's concern. So A is correct. Remember that a decade is a period of 10 years. Moving on, Lecture 2.
Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
Okay, so that's how the Arctic ground squirrel is able to cope in this extreme environment. Now let's talk about your reading assignment about reindeer, also typically found in Siberia and other far northern regions. Who'd like to start off? Yes, Mike?
Well, for one thing, they've got thick hair all over their body, even on their noses.
Yes, they're very well insulated, and the thickness of their fur varies depending on the season. Good. Yes?
Newborn reindeer are very adult-like. Like they can stand as soon as they're born, and by their second day, they can already run as fast as a human.
Critical. Food is very scarce in the far north, so reindeer herds have to cover lots of ground every day. And in the fall, they might easily trek 1,000 kilometers or more to get to their winter feeding site. So if you're a newborn, you've got to get up to speed fast. Okay. Other adaptations?
Also, reindeer don't have to keep their legs as warm as their main body, so they don't have to use up as much energy keeping them warm.
Yes. So that means they can allocate less energy to heating their extremities and more energy to maintaining a stable temperature in their body core, where their vital organs are located. And, I don't think it's mentioned in your textbook, but even different parts of a reindeer's leg are adapted for optimal cold weather performance. The fat in the lower part of their legs, the part that gets coldest, that fat has a different chemical structure from the fat in the upper parts of the leg, so it doesn't get hard, even at temperatures down around freezing. It stays kind of gel-like, kind of oily. Okay, good. What about food? What do you remember about that?
Well, they're pretty flexible.
Okay. Can you explain that a little more?
Well, they can eat a lot of different kinds of plants, so that improves their chances of coming across something they can eat. I think they said that they found that the reindeer in one herd had eaten something like 37 different kinds of plants.
Okay, yes. You've really done your reading. And reindeer also eat a number of different plant species that most animals are not very interested in, which means
they don't have a lot of competition when it comes to that food?
That's right. In particular, your reading mentions lichens. Lichens are plants you'll find growing on rocks in the far north, sometimes referred to as reindeer moss. They look pretty basic, just a little moss on a rock. But lichens are actually quite complex. They're not just a single organism. They're actually a kind of combination of some sort of a fungus and some sort of algae that live together in a symbiotic relationship. Anyway, okay, reindeer. Oh, yes, and one more thing about lichens. They crank out a lot of chemicals, which is probably at least part of the reason why they're not considered all that tasty by most animals. Anyway, does anyone remember what your reading said about them?
Yeah, somehow when reindeer eat lichens, they're able to draw a lot more nutrients from them than other animals. Like if a cow or a sheep eats lichens, they're only going to get like half as much nutrition out of them as a reindeer would.
That's right. And in winter, lichens are crucial for reindeer because they supply energy. But they don't have all the proteins and minerals the reindeer need. So when reindeer get to the end of the long winter, they're often very thin, with low levels of minerals. In spring, they have to eat different plants and replenish what they've lost over the winter. So what reindeer have done is they've developed the ability to digest different plants in different seasons by adjusting the microbes in their digestive systems. As you know, microbes are microorganisms, like bacteria, that help to digest or break down food. And, well, what's interesting about reindeer is that they change the proportion of different microbes in their digestive system. So the reindeer might have more of one kind of microbe in winter to help digest the plants it eats then. And in the summer, it would have more of another kind of microbe to help it digest summer plants. That way, the reindeer gets more nutrition out of different foods at different times of the year.
As you've probably noticed, the lecture is very academic, which is why you need to know many advanced words to understand it. To do that, watch academic lectures or listen to podcasts on geology, astronomy, biology, and other topics. But if you don't understand every single word, don't panic. Make the most of the words you do know and try to guess the meaning of the others from context. Remember that the tasks you'll get do not require you to understand every single detail, but rather get a good understanding of the main points. Let's look at the questions.
What is the lecture mainly about?
The first question, as always, is about the main topic of the lecture. It's B. Adaptations that enable reindeer to live in the cold climates. The professor started the lecture by mentioning the Arctic ground squirrel, which was just to distract you. She then went back to the topic of the lecture and started talking about how reindeer can survive in cold climates.
According to the professor, why is it necessary for newborn reindeer to be able to walk and run almost immediately?
B is correct. Reindeer herds have to travel long distances every day.
What does the professor say about the lower part of a reindeer's legs?
The right answer is D. It contains fat that is different from the fat in the upper part of the leg. The lecturer said that the fat has a different chemical structure and stays kind of gel-like or oily.
What does the professor imply about lichens?
This question is about lichens. Lichens are plants that are similar to moss. The lecturer also says that lichens are very complex and are a combination of fungi and algae. So even if you don't know what lichens are, you can figure out the meaning from the lecture. But you'll need to know words like moss, fungus, and algae to do so. The correct answer is B. They're more abundant than other Arctic plants during the winter. Abundant means existing or being available in large quantities. Another popular word on the TOEFL test.
What does the professor say about the microbes in a reindeer's digestive system?
C is correct. The proportion of various microbes changes to accommodate changes in the reindeer's diet.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
But lichens are actually quite complex. They're not just a single organism. They're actually a kind of combination of some sort of a fungus and some sort of algae that live together in a symbiotic relationship. Anyway, okay, reindeer.
Why does the professor say this?
Anyway, okay, reindeer.
The professor said, anyway, okay, reindeer, because she wants to return to the main topic of the lecture. So C is correct. As you can see, this lecture is a bit more challenging, and we have a lot of academic vocabulary here. Some examples are abundant, lichens, to allocate. To allocate means to distribute. The lecturer mentioned how reindeer allocate less energy to heating their extremities. Now, extremities equal limbs in this context. By the way, let me know if you find this kind of video helpful and if you'd like to see more videos of the listening and reading tests in the future. The next video I've prepared for you is about my students' experiences. It's very helpful for those who are currently preparing for the test. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon to make sure you don't miss it. Finally, it's time for the last lecture.
Listen to part of a lecture in an archaeology class.
So if I ask you what most archaeologists do with all those pieces of broken pottery they find at excavation sites, you'd probably say that they help establish the time period of the site. Pretty obvious, huh? Pottery helps us order things in time to assign relative dates. Basically, when we date pottery, we look at its frequency at a given site. As you can probably surmise, styles of pottery vary over time in terms of how they're made, what they're made of, and what they were used for. So as archaeologists, we build up a picture, a sequence of how pottery changed over time, as well as how its popularity varied over time, which we can tell by the frequency of a style at a site, how many occurrences we find at a given site. But pottery can provide evidence about a lot of things, not just dating evidence, not just evidence of the time period that pottery was created. So there's also another type of evidence that we call distributional evidence. Okay, pottery is evidence of distribution. It, pottery, provides evidence that trade took place. Pots were traded for themselves or given as gifts, but even more often they changed hands because they were used as containers for food or wine. To fully understand how pottery is used as distributional evidence, we have to know its origin, where it was made. So how do we figure this out? Well, by studying what the pottery is made of. You look at the material that a pot's made of to know where it was made and its distribution. Okay, a third kind of evidence is evidence of function. The function of the site where the pottery was found and sometimes about the lives of the people who lived there. Now this evidence is a bit tougher to interpret than the other two, and there are several reasons for this. First of all, pottery is usually not found in primary contexts. That is, it's often not found in the place where it was used. Think about your average town dump. You know, the place where everyone's unwanted stuff ends up. Can you imagine archaeologists 1,000 years from now digging up a town dump and then using the items found there to get meaningful information about how the objects found there were used? Probably not. A second reason why function is harder to identify is that not all objects found in one spot can be assumed to have identical functions, even if they look similar. If you come across a collection of pots at a site, you need to work at the level of the group rather than the individual pots, because you can't assume that they all have the same function just because they were found in the same place. So this is where pottery's form comes into play. The form of a pot can give us some ideas about its function, the suitability of the pottery to serve a specific function. However, we have to be careful when it comes to skeuomorphs. These objects are copies of the designs of other objects, but in another material, and this can be problematic because sometimes the new or different material is not well suited to the design. A good example of this comes from 15th century Dutch ceramics. A bronze cauldron was copied in ceramic, including these sort of big angled handles. And while it worked well in bronze, it didn't work in the ceramic skeuomorph. Well, because the ceramic handles couldn't support the weight of the pot when it's full, it just couldn't function as it was intended to.
What is the lecture mainly about?
The lecture mentions that pottery helps assign relative dates, but it can provide evidence about a lot of other things, not just dating evidence. So C is correct. Kinds of archaeological evidence that pottery provides.
Why does the professor list several reasons that pots were traded?
A. To support her claim that pottery provides evidence of distribution.
According to the professor, what is one reason it is important to study the material from which pottery was made?
B. It can help archaeologists establish where the pottery came from.
According to the professor, why is it difficult to gain information on the function of a pot?
A and D are correct. Not all pots found in the same location have the same function, and pots are rarely found in the places in which they were used.
What is a skeuomorph?
A skeuomorph is an object with a similar function as another, but with a different design, so A is the right answer.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
So if I ask you what most archaeologists do with all those pieces of broken pottery they find at excavation sites, you'd probably say that they help establish the time period of the site. Pretty obvious, huh?
Why does the professor say this?
Pretty obvious, huh?
The professor says, pretty obvious, huh? Because she expects that the students are already familiar with the point about how archaeologists use pottery. So A is again correct. Today we're going to work through a full TOEFL listening section together. As usual, we'll go through 3 lectures and 2 conversations. After each question, I'll pause the video to give you some time to answer. And then I'll reveal the correct response. This won't happen on test day, but it's a great way to practice and review any mistakes right away. We'll also cover some key vocabulary from the lectures and conversations. So grab a pen or a pencil and let's dive in.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a university employee at the campus employment office.
Hi, can I help you?
I hope so. My name's Mark Whitman.
Don't I remember you from last year? You worked in, where was it? The art library?
Yeah, well, you're good. That was me, and I really enjoyed the work.
Right. Yeah, your supervisor gave us some really great feedback at the end of the year. Oh, he's so organized, always on time, helpful.
Really? Well, I'm glad. It was a good job.
Well, we usually try to match students' jobs with their academic interests.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what career I'm headed for, but librarian is a possibility. It was a great experience to learn how it works and meet some people working in the field. But for this year, well, that's what I wanted to ask about.
Oh, how come you waited so long to come in? You know how fast campus jobs fill up. If you'd come in earlier, you could probably have gotten the library job again. I mean, since you have the experience from last year, you don't need the training and all. But it's been filled now.
Yeah, I know. But I'd planned to get a job working at a restaurant off campus this year. I really need to make more money than I did last year, and working as a waiter, there's always the tips. But I've tried a ton of places, and I haven't found anything. I know it's really late, but, well, I was wondering if maybe there was some job that hadn't been taken, or maybe someone started a job and, had to drop it or something.
Well, I doubt you'll find anything.
Could you possibly check? I know it's a long shot, but my friend Suzanne, she takes photography classes in Harrison Hall, and she sort of thought there might be an opening in the janitorial staff.
Why does your friend, the photography student, think she has information about a janitorial staff opening? I'm pretty sure those jobs are filled. In fact, I remember taking lots of applications for them. But let me double-check it online.
She said the whole studio arts building, and especially the photo lab, have been kind of, sort of messy lately. I mean, she says there's, chemicals and stuff left out, and, it's like no one's been cleaning up. Oh, but that could just be, students using the lab after hours or something, like after it's been cleaned.
Hang on. There is an asterisk next to one of the job numbers here. There's a note. Let's see. Your friend's right. Seems like one of the student janitors quit a couple of weeks ago for some reason. Well, whatever. It looks like this is your lucky day.
Wow, that is so great. So, who's the contact person?
Check with the janitorial office.
Fine. Thanks so much.
Why does the student go to the employment office?
The correct answer is C. The student goes to the employment office to find out about getting an on-campus job. He already got great feedback from his supervisor at the end of the year, so he doesn't need any more feedback.
Why does the university employee seem surprised at the student's request for on-campus jobs?
The correct answer is B. The woman is surprised at the student's request because she expected him to apply earlier in the semester. She says jobs on campus fill up very quickly, and the library job that a student had last year has already been filled.
What does the student imply about the job he had at the library last year?
The correct answer is B. It did not pay as well as jobs in restaurants. The student said he needed to make more money this year. And since waiters get tips, he wanted to get a job off campus in a restaurant. This means that his previous job at the library didn't pay very well.
Why does the student mention his friend Suzanne?
D is correct, to explain why he thinks there is a job opening. The student mentioned that his friend, Suzanne, takes photography classes in Harrison Hall, and she told him that there might be an opening in the janitorial staff.
What can be inferred about the woman when she says this?
Why does your friend, the photography student, think she has information about a janitorial staff opening?
The correct answer is C. She doubts the accuracy of the information. The woman is skeptical that a photography student would know about a janitorial staff opening. Well, that wraps up part 1. Here is some useful vocabulary we came across in this conversation. Janitor. A janitor is a person employed to take care of a large building, such as a school or college. He or she deals with the cleaning, repairs, and so on. Janitorial. Janitorial means relating to the job of being a janitor. In the conversation, the woman said janitorial staff, which is a more formal way of saying janitors, to fill up. To fill up means to become full. Campus jobs fill up very fast. A long shot. A long shot is something you try, even though it's unlikely to be successful. I know it's a long shot, but my friend Suzanne thought there might be an opening in the janitorial staff. Let's move on to the next part where you'll listen to a lecture.
Listen to part of a lecture in an earth science class. The class has been discussing volcanoes.
Okay, we know the Earth's surface, the crust, is made up of tectonic plates and that these huge slabs of rocky crust are slowly sliding over or under or past each other. And we said that most of the world's volcanoes occur at the boundaries of these tectonic plates, where you have hot molten rock squeezing up through gaps between the plates. But some volcanoes occur not at the edges, but in the middle of a continental or oceanic plate. The Hawaiian Islands, for example, are thousands of kilometers away from any plate boundary, and yet you have vast amounts of magma, molten rock or lava, flowing up through the Earth's crust, which means, of course, that volcanic activity there can't be explained simply by plate tectonics. So, how do we explain these volcanic anomalies, these exceptions to the general rule? Well, back in 1963, a geophysicist by the name of Wilson came up with a hot spot theory to explain how this particular type of volcanic activity can occur, and can go on for maybe tens or even hundreds of millions of years. Wilson's theory was that hotspots exist below tectonic plates, and they're the cause of these volcanoes. But what causes the hotspots? Well, the most popular theory that's been proposed is the plume hypothesis. According to this hypothesis, plumes, basically columns of extremely hot magma. These plumes well up from deep inside the planet's interior, maybe even as deep as its core, and rise all the way up to melt through the Earth's crust. Imagine a burning candle, And imagine moving a sheet of heavy paper slowly over the flame of the candle. You're going to get a series of burn spots in the paper. Well, that's just like what's happening with the Hawaiian Islands, but instead of a sheet of paper, you've got a tectonic plate, and it's moving over this plume of intensely hot magma, and rather than a series of burn spots in the paper, you're getting a chain of volcanic islands where the hot plume melts through the crust under the Pacific Ocean at one point after another, with active volcanoes on the younger islands that are now just above the plume. And the other islands, well, the farther away from the plume they are now, the older they are, and the longer ago their volcanoes went dormant or extinct. Incidentally, volcanic islands may seem small, but the island known as the Big Island of Hawaii is one of the tallest topographic features on the planet, more than 5 kilometers from the seafloor to the ocean surface, and almost that much again up to its highest peak. That's nearly 10 kilometers from ocean floor to the highest point on the island, which makes it taller even than Mount Everest. So, you can imagine the huge amounts of magma or lava that have flowed up to form even just this one island, much less the whole chain of islands. Now, the plume hypothesis provides a pretty elegant explanation for a volcanic anomaly like the Hawaiian Islands, but while it's hypothetically attractive, there's very little direct evidence to support the theory because, so far, no one's been able to actually observe what's happening that far beneath the Earth's crust. Some studies have been done, seismographic, geochemical, where the data's consistent with the model, but they aren't definitive proof. Even the model supporters aren't comfortable claiming that it explains every volcanic anomaly, and, like any popular theory, I suppose, it has some determined critics. These critics have put forth a number of alternative theories, all unproven so far, but one well-regarded theory is the crack hypothesis, which assumes that hot spots are created when a piece of the crust gets stretched thinner and thinner, and the resulting stress causes small cracks to open up at weak spots in the crust. And it's through these cracks that magma pushes up to form volcanoes. Proponents of the crack hypothesis consider this a widespread phenomenon and believe that magma's not coming up from deep within the Earth's interior, but rather from just beneath the surface crust. This hypothesis is attractive because it fits with what we already know about plate tectonics, and it fits what we know about some secondary smaller hotspots. But how well does it explain the Hawaiian Islands? Could a series of random cracks produce that same particular string of islands, that sequence so neatly from old to young? You know, it worries me when a theory depends on coincidence to produce results.
What is the lecture mainly about?
The correct answer is C. Explanations for why volcanoes occur in some locations. At the beginning of the lecture, the professor says that we know what tectonic plates are, and that most volcanoes occur at the boundaries of the tectonic plates. But some volcanoes do not. They occur in the middle of the tectonic plates. Then the professor asks, so how do we explain these volcanic anomalies, these exceptions to the general rule? This tells us that the lecture will be about the reasons why volcanoes occur in the middle of the tectonic plates.
According to the professor, why was the hotspot theory originally proposed?
A is correct. To explain prolonged volcanic activity far from plate boundaries, the professor says that in 1963, a geophysicist, Wilson, came up with a hotspot theory to explain how this particular type of volcanic activity can occur. By this particular type of volcanic activity, he means volcanic eruptions that occur in the middle of a tectonic plate, far from plate boundaries.
Why does the professor describe moving a sheet of heavy paper over a candle?
The correct answer is C. To illustrate one hypothesis for the way some volcanic anomalies are formed. This hypothesis is the plume hypothesis. The professor first introduced it, then explained what plumes are, and then began to explain how they work. That's when he used the example of paper and a candle.
Why does the professor discuss how high one of the Hawaiian Islands rises above the ocean floor?
D is correct. To emphasize that hotspot volcanoes can produce large amounts of magma. The professor says that's nearly 10 kilometers from the ocean floor to the highest point on the island. And then, he says, so you can imagine the huge amounts of magma or lava that have flowed up to form even just this one island.
According to the crack hypothesis, what causes a hotspot?
D is correct. Hot magma flows up at the point where a tectonic plate has been stretched thin. The professor says that according to the crack hypothesis, hotspots are created when a piece of the crust gets stretched thinner and thinner. As a result, small cracks open up in the crust, and it's through these cracks that magma pushes up to form volcanoes.
What is the professor's opinion of the two main hypotheses he presents?
The correct answer is B. Each hypothesis accounts for some, but not all volcanic anomalies. The professor says that the plume hypothesis is attractive, but even its supporters are uncomfortable claiming that it explains every volcanic anomaly. He later says that the crack hypothesis is also attractive, but it doesn't explain the Hawaiian Islands. This means that neither theory explains all volcanic anomalies. This lecture and the following questions were quite challenging, right? But even so, it's possible to answer each question correctly, if you know how to take notes effectively. In fact, note-taking is one of the most important skills you need to develop in order to do well on the TOEFL listening section. But it's not easy. Some students don't take enough notes and miss key points that could have helped them answer the questions, while others try to write everything down and lose track of the main idea. If you want to master note-taking once and for all, join our TOEFL course. We'll not only do practice tests together, but we'll also break down lecture and conversation scripts to see what's worth writing down and what's not. I'll share essential strategies for the listening section that'll make answering questions much easier, and we'll cover important words, such as campus vocabulary, that you'll undoubtedly need in the listening, speaking, and even writing sections. If you're having trouble getting the score you need on the listening section, or on the TOEFL overall, just click on the link below to sign up. Now, here is some essential vocabulary from the lecture that you may encounter on all TOEFL sections. The crust. The crust is the surface of the Earth. Tectonic plates. Tectonic plates are parts of the Earth's surface. Boundaries, edges. Boundaries or edges are the lines that mark the limit of something. Molten rock. Molten rock is hot liquid rock. There are two types of molten rock, magma and lava. Magma is hot liquid rock that is below the surface, and lava is hot liquid rock that is on the surface. Plumes. Plumes are columns of very hot magma. A dormant volcano. This is a volcano that isn't active right now. Think of it as sleeping. An extinct volcano, on the other hand, is one that is no longer active. Think of it as dead. I'm planning to make a separate video on this topic because, as you can see, there are just so many words to cover. So if you're interested, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss it when it comes out. Let's move on to the next section.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Hi, Professor. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about the class you're teaching next semester, the course on Polish drama. I was thinking of taking it.
Well, that's an upper division course. You don't look familiar to me. Are you a student in this department?
No, actually I'm not.
Okay. Have you had other classes in the Slavic languages department here or somewhere else?
No, that's the thing. I was just wondering how good my Polish would have to be, whether the class is taught in Polish or not.
Well, you'd have to have some knowledge of it. By that level, a lot of the students are quite fluent. Plus, there are some native speakers in the department. And we don't plan for it to happen, but it's pretty common for the discussions to kind of move in and out of English and Polish, and it can be difficult to follow. So, how well do you speak Polish?
Not so great. It's just that my father's from there, so I'm interested in learning about, Polish history, Polish culture. Plus, I'm studying drama. I'll probably major in it. I love plays, so I thought your course might be perfect.
To be honest with you, you have to realize that we'll be watching videos of performances, and maybe, if we can swing it, even watch a live performance, and those won't necessarily be in translation. Also, texts are sometimes available in translation, but even then some references will be to the original. I'd hope you'd be fairly confident in reading.
To be honest, it sounds totally over my head.
You know what? I believe they'll be offering a survey course on Polish literature. Let me check here. Yes, I thought it was being offered this time. Professor Jaworski's teaching it. Let's see, it covers the major works, epic romantic poetry, the novels, and it does cover one or two plays.
And this is in English?
Yes, you'll be reading mostly English translations, and the discussions will be in English.
Novels and poetry.
They'll provide you with a great historical context for the plays, so when you do get to them, you're going to really have a feel for the times they lived in, so to speak. Plus, this course might also give you the impetus to learn more Polish. Get it to the level where you'd be ready for the other class.
What are the speakers mainly discussing?
B is correct. Whether the student should take an advanced course in Polish drama. This conversation was relatively easy, so I'll just give you the correct answers here.
According to the professor, what will students do in her class?
The correct answers are C and D. Use the Polish language in class discussions and watch recorded performances of Polish plays.
Why is the student interested in the professor's class?
The correct answers are A and D. He wants to learn about his family background, and the course is related to the student's intended course of study.
What does the professor think the student should do?
D is correct. Take a survey course in Polish literature before taking a Polish drama course.
What does the professor imply when she says this?
I'd hope you'd be fairly confident in reading.
C is correct. She is concerned that the student may not be able to read Polish. Vocabulary time. As I mentioned, this conversation was easy, so we only have 2 words worth noting. Over my head. Over my head means too hard for me to understand. Impetus. Impetus is a force that encourages a particular action. For example, plus, this course might also give you the impetus to learn more Polish. Time for the next lecture.
Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
Okay, today I'd like to spend some time going into more detail about symbiosis. Symbiosis, what is it? Anyone?
I thought it's when 2 organisms are in a relationship that they both benefit from. Well, at least that's what I thought it was until I did the reading last night. Now I'm kind of confused about it because the book used that definition to describe mutualism. Could you explain the difference?
Good. I was hoping that someone would bring that up. Sometimes scientists working in different fields use the term symbiosis to mean slightly different things, and it can get confusing. For example, when symbiosis is used as a synonym for mutualism. But there are quite a few of us out there who think there should be a clearer distinction made between the two. Okay, where to begin? The original definition of symbiosis is pretty simple. It simply means living together. So any close relationship between 2 organisms of different species would be considered a symbiotic relationship, including positive and negative relationships. Mutualism, then, is a kind of symbiosis, a specific type of symbiotic relationship where both organisms benefit somehow. So your book is correct. Now, I want to make it clear that the positive result from being in a mutualistic relationship doesn't have to be equal for both organisms. It's not a one-to-one ratio here. Is everyone with me so far? Symbiosis, general term. Mutualism, a narrower, more specific kind of symbiosis. Okay. Now, let's take a closer look at mutualistic relationships. I'll start off by describing a case of mutualism that involves a certain butterfly species found in South Africa and Australia. It's a good example of how dependence on a mutualistic relationship can vary. Okay, there's this butterfly family, and I'll spare you the fancy Latin name because it's not important for our purposes here. I'll call them coppers and blues. Well, because most members of this family have blue or copper-colored wings. I think this is one of the most interesting cases of mutualism. These butterflies require the presence of ants to complete their life cycle. Their interaction with ants is obligatory. So this is what happens. A female butterfly of these coppers and blues will lay eggs only on vegetation where there are ants of a particular species. The butterflies can smell ants leave behind pheromones, a special chemical signal. The butterfly recognizes the ant's pheromones on the plant. And then the newly hatched butterflies, the caterpillars, will feed on this plant after they hatch from the eggs. As the caterpillar gets a little older and finds shelter under nearby rocks or stones to protect itself from predators, it's always attended or escorted by ants. And it always makes its way back to the host plant to feed, guided by the ants, the ant escort service, so to speak. Now, why would the ants go through all this trouble? What's their benefit? Mary?
It's probably related to food.
You're onto something.
Okay, ants feed on sweet stuff, right? So the caterpillar must have some kind of special access to honey or sugars or something like that. Maybe caterpillars produce honey somehow. On second thought, I'm probably way off.
You're pretty close, actually. The caterpillars have a honey gland, an organ that secretes an amino acid and carbohydrate liquid. The caterpillar secretes the liquid from the honey gland, rather large quantities, enough to feed several ants. But what makes this relationship obligatory for the caterpillar? Well, if the ants don't feed regularly on the liquid from the caterpillar's honey gland, the gland overloads and gets infected. The infection will kill the caterpillar, and it'll never reach its final stage of development, becoming a butterfly. John?
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm following here. The caterpillar needs the ants, or it won't make it to the stage where it can become a butterfly. And the ants do this because they get an easy meal out of it, right? But the ants don't absolutely need the caterpillar for survival because they can get food from other places, right? So it's still called mutualism, even though it seems like the caterpillar's getting way more out of it. Oh, wait, you said they don't have to equally benefit. Never mind, sorry.
Yes, but there is a type of mutualism where the relationship is necessary for both organisms to survive. It's called obligatory mutualism, and we'll talk about that in the next class.
What is the professor mainly discussing?
The correct answer is B, a specific kind of symbiotic relationship between organisms. The professor said that mutualism is a type of symbiosis. More precisely, it's a specific type of symbiotic relationship in which both organisms benefit in some way. Then the professor said, "Now, let's take a closer look at mutualistic relationships." This means that in this lecture, the professor is going to discuss mutualistic relationships, which are specific kinds of symbiotic relationships between organisms. That's why answer B is correct.
What does the professor imply about the term symbiosis?
A is correct. It's often used with too narrow a meaning. The professor said that some scientists use the term symbiosis as a synonym for mutualism. But the term symbiosis is more general. It simply means living together. Mutualism, on the other hand, is a narrow term. It means living together and getting some benefit from it. Because scientists sometimes use the term symbiosis instead of mutualism, it's being used with too narrow a meaning, so answer A is correct.
How do the butterflies mentioned by the professor facilitate the relationship between caterpillars and ants of a certain species?
C is correct. The butterflies lay their eggs on plants where the ants are present. The professor said, a female butterfly of these coppers and blues will only lay eggs on vegetation, where there are ants of a particular species.
In the example the professor mentions, how do the ants benefit from their interaction with the caterpillars?
The correct answer is D. The caterpillars produce a liquid from a species gland to feed the ants. The professor mentioned that the caterpillars have honey glands. They secrete the liquid from these glands, and this liquid is enough to feed the ants.
What aspect of mutualism does the professor illustrate with the example of the caterpillars and the ants?
The correct answer is B. It's not necessary for both organisms to benefit equally from the relationship. Answer B is correct, because the caterpillars need the ants to survive, but the ants do not. They can get food from other places, so the caterpillars and the ants do not benefit equally.
What can be inferred about the student when she says this?
Maybe caterpillars produce honey somehow. On second thought, I'm probably way off.
D is correct. She doubts that her statement is correct. The student said, on second thought, I'm probably way off, which means I'm probably completely wrong. Let's review key vocabulary from this lecture. Caterpillars. Caterpillars are little animals that look like this. Way off. Way off means to be completely wrong or mistaken. I'm way off means I'm very wrong, or far from being right. To hatch. To hatch means for a baby animal to come out of an egg. Newly hatched butterflies are butterflies that have just come out of their cocoons. To escort. To score someone means to go with them to make sure they're safe. To secrete? To secrete means to produce liquid, a gland. A gland is an organ that secretes or produces liquid chemicals. Now, let's listen to the next lecture.
Listen to part of a lecture in an American history class.
We've been talking about the transformation, the industrialization of the United States economy in the 19th century. As the country shifted from an agricultural to an industrial base, political power shifted too. Businesses became a lot of power went from the government into the hands of business leaders. So, why did this happen? How did an elite group, a few business giants, how did they end up dominating, controlling a number of important national industries in the last quarter of the 19th century? How did they get to be so dominant? How did they figure out? How did they take advantage of the new industrialization of American society? Well, consider the example of Andrew Carnegie and the steel industry. We've already discussed the development of a national network, a national system of railroads. Well, this growth created a tremendous demand for steel. A national railroad system needs a lot of railroad tracks, right? And Carnegie seized the opportunity. He built the world's most modern steel mill. And he came up with a system of business organization called vertical integration. Vertical integration just means that every single activity of a particular industry's processing is performed by a single company. In the case of the steel industry, this means the mining of iron ore, the transportation used to get ore from the mine to the mill, turning the ore into the steel, the manufacturing process, and sales. Carnegie controlled all of these. He practiced vertical integration on such a large scale that he practically owned the whole steel industry. This, of course, gave him a lot of political clout. Just a quick sketch, but you get the idea, right? Here's another example. John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller owned an oil refinery, but he wanted to expand his business. Since there was lots of competition in the industry, he thought the smart way to go about it would be to buy his competitors' businesses. But at the time, it was illegal for one corporation to control another. So what he did was, he created an organizational structure called a trust. A trust is, I don't have to go into that now. What matters is that a trust created a single, central management team, and that team directed the activities of what otherwise still appeared to be independent companies. This new, legal entity worked so well that at one point Rockefeller controlled 90% of the country's oil refineries, which again gave him lots of political power. So you've got two different approaches to expanding a business, and both were quite effective. Of course, these weren't the only two examples. A number of big businesses run by powerful individuals developed across, a wide range of industries, like railroads, food processing, electricity. But what they all had in common was the government let them operate pretty much how they wanted to. So why did they do that? Why did the government keep such a low profile and allow individuals to gain so much control of the industries? Well, obviously, they had the wealth and the power to influence political leaders. But also, the truth is that these industry leaders made a significant contribution. Their investments in technologies led to the development of many new production techniques, which strengthened the economy, and many of them gave lots of money to charity. Andrew Carnegie was particularly admired for his generosity. But there was one thing in particular that gave them power, and that's they were beneficiaries, probably the biggest beneficiaries of a theory, a dominant political theory in the 19th century, something called laissez-faire doctrine. Laissez-faire roughly means let it alone, and that pretty much summarized the theory's philosophy. The idea was that government should leave business alone, allow it to operate unregulated. Legislatures weren't supposed to pass a lot of laws or worry about regulating business practices. When people did challenge a company's business conduct, I mean in court cases, well, the few laws that did exist were usually interpreted in favor of business interests. But over time, it started becoming increasingly obvious and troubling to the public that some of these big companies simply had too much control. There were criticisms that owners had too much opportunity to exploit workers and consumers, because they could control prices and wages. And small business owners and small farmers couldn't compete. So there was bad press, bad publicity. Enough that the government eventually felt it had to do something. So it passed two key pieces of legislation. One law was designed to regulate the prices set by the railroads. Another made it illegal for trusts to be used to limit competition. Both were aimed squarely at reducing the exclusive control that existed in some industries.
What is the lecture mainly about?
C is correct. Reasons that business leaders gained political power in the late 19th century United States. The professor said, a lot of power went from the government into the hands of business leaders. And then asked, why did this happen? So it's clear that C is the correct answer.
Why does the professor discuss vertical integration?
The correct answer is A. To explain how Andrew Carnegie gained control of the steel industry. The professor mentioned Andrew Carnegie and the steel industry. He said that when the demand for steel increased, Carnegie built the most modern steel mill and came up with the idea of vertical integration, which allowed him to perform all the activities of the steel industry, and as a result, practically own the entire industry.
In what two ways did business leaders make a positive contribution to the United States in the 19th century?
The correct answers are A and D. They invested in new production technologies, and they supported charitable causes. In the lecture, the professor said that industry leaders made a significant contribution. Their investments in technologies led to the development of many new production techniques, and many of them gave lots of money to charity.
According to the professor, What is the main reason that some businesses were able to become powerful during the 19th century?
C is correct. The government did not impose many regulations on businesses. The professor said that one thing in particular that gave businesses power was the idea that the government should leave business alone and allow it to operate unregulated. As a result, legislators weren't supposed to pass a lot of laws or worry about regulating business practices.
Why did the government pass new laws aimed at businesses?
B is correct. To respond to complaints from the public. In the lecture, the professor said, but over time, it started becoming increasingly obvious and troubling to the public that some of these big companies simply had too much control. There were criticisms that owners had too much opportunity to exploit workers and consumers because they could control prices and wages. So there was bad press, bad publicity, enough that the government eventually felt it had to do something.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
A trust is, I don't have to go into that now. What matters is that a trust created a single, central management team, and that team directed the activities of what otherwise still appeared to be independent companies.
What does the professor imply about the term trust?
The correct answer is B. It's unnecessary to explain the details of the term. The professor said, a trust is? Well, I don't have to go into that now. So it's clear she didn't think she needed to explain what a trust is at that point in the lecture. The most important words from this lecture are to shift. To shift means to move. To seize the opportunity. To seize the opportunity is to use the opportunity. Iron ore. Iron ore is rock from which iron can be extracted. A mine. A mine is a pit in the earth from which minerals are extracted. A steel mill. A steel mill is a factory where steel is made. An oil refinery. An oil refinery is a factory that turns crude oil into usable petroleum products, such as diesel fuel, gasoline, and more. A beneficiary. A beneficiary is a person who receives money or benefits as a result of something else. A beneficiary of a theory is the person who benefits from that theory. A legislator. A legislator is someone who is responsible for making laws.
Let's dive straight into the first lecture. Listen carefully and organize your notes into clear sections. TOEFL questions usually focus on specific thematic blocks within the lecture, so recognizing these blocks is crucial. If you're unsure how to take notes effectively, or feel that note-taking gets in the way of your understanding, join our TOEFL course. we'll analyze lectures and conversations in detail, and I'll show you exactly what to include in your notes and what to leave out. I'll also share useful abbreviations to help you write faster and more efficiently. In addition to listening practice, we'll cover reading question types and work through reading passages together. For those struggling with vocabulary, we've prepared Quizlet sets with new words organized by topic: astronomy, archaeology, agriculture, physics, and more. Click on the link below to join our close-knit TOEFL community. Lecture 1.
Listen to part of a university lecture on animal behavior by a professor of biology. We're looking at animal behavior this week, and let's turn now, class, to one of its most dramatic manifestations: animal mimicry. Organisms that are good to eat or that are attacked for other reasons often develop devices, through evolution of course, techniques and devices to protect themselves from their attackers in order to survive and in order to reproduce and pass their genes on to the next generation. And one of these techniques, one of these strategies, is to look like something else, to look like something that is not good to eat, or something that is otherwise of no interest to the predator. An organism that does this, that resembles something else, is called a mimic. And the thing that it has evolved to resemble is called the model, while the predator that it is trying to mislead is called the recipient, the one that receives the misleading image. Some mimics do this by adopting camouflage, which is a cryptic resemblance to something of no interest to its enemy. And by doing this, they become invisible. They are hidden. Many animals, insects, lizards, amphibians, mimic the abundant plant life in the habitat around them. I'm sure that you've seen green grasshoppers and brown moths that seem to be well hidden on grass stems and tree trunks when they're motionless. But the leaf-tailed gecko, a small lizard in Madagascar, is a master at this. It avoids its enemies by looking exactly like a cluster of old dead leaves. And there are various species of katydids, grasshopper-like insects that have managed to duplicate the appearance of leaves with startling accuracy. In all stages of growth, some species looking like fresh green leaves and others looking like old decaying leaves, complete with leaf veins, weathered edges, and mildew spots. These adaptations make these animals difficult or impossible for a predator to identify or even notice. And so these otherwise defenseless creatures are overlooked or passed by. Other organisms defend themselves directly with stings or bites or with poisons or other noxious chemicals, and such organisms often assume bold, characteristic colors and markings, called warning coloration, that warns a predator, reminds it that this creature can inflict pain or discomfort, or that it tastes very bad. The bold orange and black pattern of the common monarch butterfly, or the black and yellow bands on a bumblebee are such warning colorations. And sometimes this warning coloration is so effective that another species, a species that doesn't have any of the protective devices of sting or poison or whatever, will adopt the same warning colors and pattern. This sort of mimicry is called Batesian mimicry. The name comes from the early zoologist H.W. Bates, who back in 1862 first suggested an explanation for the origins of mimicry based on Charles Darwin's new theory of natural selection. This was one of the earliest applications of Darwin's ideas to an unknown biological phenomenon. Now, viceroy butterflies taste good to many birds, but because they mimic the monarch butterfly's model's color pattern, because viceroy butterflies look like monarch butterflies, they are avoided, just like the monarch is. In the same way, many harmless fly species resemble the bumblebee model, and also in this way they avoid being eaten by the recipients, birds. So these are Bastian mimics. There are several conditions that must be fulfilled, though, for a Bastian mimic to be successful. The mimic must of course share the same general region and habitat as its model, but the mimic must also be less numerous than its model, which must be relatively abundant. That way, the odds are that the recipient predator will sample an unpalatable model first, which is very important for keeping the trick effective. A similar kind of mimicry is Müllerian mimicry, named after another early biologist. And in this sort of mimicry, both the model and the mimic are dangerous or taste bad. A very obvious example is the way that so many unrelated species of bees, wasps, and ants have assumed similar, bold, black and yellow or black and orange banded patterns. By doing this, Müllerian mimics present a united image that predators soon learn to be weary of. There's also another aspect of mimicry that I'd like to mention too, and that's the mimicry used by predators. This is called aggressive mimicry, and it is used to conceal or misrepresent a predator until its prey comes near enough to capture. Many mantids, for example, are green or brown, so that they blend in with their plant surroundings. But some tropical mantids are fantastically shaped and colored, like the beautiful orchid mantis, which resembles a petal of one of those tropical flowers, and it hides motionless next to one of these orchids until an insect comes within its reach. There are also several green-colored vine and grass snakes of various families, which lie invisible among the tangled vines and branches of the jungle until they suddenly lash out to grab their prey. Actually, there are an endless number of ingenious mimics in the natural world, and I recommend that you all try a Google Images search tonight for some more interesting examples of this fascinating behavior.
Question 1. Why does the lecturer mention Charles Darwin? The correct answer is B. Darwin's theory was used to explain mimicry. In the lecture, the professor explains what Batesian mimicry is. He says that the name comes from a zoologist who first proposed an explanation for the origins of mimicry. This zoologist based his proposal on Charles Darwin's new theory of natural selection. And this was one of the earliest applications of Darwin's ideas to an unknown biological phenomenon. So Darwin wasn't the one to explain mimicry, nor was he mentioned because he was the creator of the theory of evolution. The lecturer mentioned him because this theory was used to explain mimicry. Question 2. What is the term used for an organism that is fooled by mimicry? The recipient. Answer A. An organism that fools a predator is called a mimic. It pretends to be something else, or the model, and the predator being fooled by mimicry is the recipient. Question 3. Why does the lecturer mention katydids? Because they look like leaves. D is the correct answer. The professor says that some species of katydids, which look like grasshoppers, have managed to duplicate the appearance of leaves. Question 4. Some moths and butterflies have large owl-like eye spots concealed on their underwings, which they can suddenly display to a predator. Which kind of mimicry is this an example of? The correct answer is A. Batesian mimicry. Batesian mimicry is a type of mimicry in which an organism tries to look like another dangerous organism to deter predators. In this case, moths and butterflies have eye spots similar to the eyes of an owl, a predator that other attackers might fear. So moths and butterflies protect themselves by looking like other dangerous animals, which is exactly what Batesian mimicry is all about. Question 5. Which organism is presented as an example of aggressive mimicry? The orchid mantis. B is the right answer. Aggressive mimicry is a type of mimicry used to hide a predator until its prey is close enough to capture. The orchid mantis looks very much like an orchid, a beautiful tropical flower. It hides next to other orchids until an insect comes close enough to attack. Question 6. Which would be the best title for this lecture? Animal deception. Answer C. The lecture is about how animals trick their attackers to protect themselves. They do this by pretending to be something they are not. Now, to deceive means to convince someone that something false is the truth. It's a synonym for the verb to trick. So the correct answer is animal deception. Now, let's check the new vocabulary we encountered in this lecture. We saw such words as predator, insects, lizards, amphibians, habitat, grasshoppers, zoologist, snakes, and prey. Now it's time for the second lecture. You'll listen to a lecture from a marine biology class. Remember the word marine from our vocabulary list? Well, here it is. Usually, TOEFL lectures include 6 questions, but in this lecture, we'll only have 5 questions. Now, let's give this lecture a try and see if it's more challenging than the previous one.
Listen to part of a lecture from a marine biology class. You've been reading this month about food chains and food webs. Today we'll discuss these in relation to seafood. How many of you like seafood? Most of you. So do I. In fact, I'm on a seafood diet. I see food, I eat it. Get it? Okay. But seriously, folks, today we're going to talk about trophic relationships in marine food chains and webs. Who can remind us what a trophic relationship is? Yes, Miss Lee.
It's what an organism eats and the things that eat that organism.
Very good. Trophic relationships describe the relationship between producers and consumers, so they help us diagram food chains and food webs. Now, in marine ecosystems, like other ecosystems, food is needed for matter, growth and reproduction, and for energy, metabolic processes within the body. Also, like other ecosystems, marine ecosystems have producers, consumers, and decomposers. The primary producers are autotrophic plankton. Autotrophic means these plankton can synthesize their own food. Autotrophs are consumed by heterotroph organisms. Hetero means other. So in this case, heterotrophic means organisms that can't synthesize their own food. They must rely on autotrophs for food energy. The primary consumers in marine food chains are the plant eaters, herbivores, and the secondary consumers are both the meat eaters, carnivores, and predators that eat both meat and plants, omnivores. The decomposers are heterotrophic bacteria, which get energy from body wastes and dead tissue, thus cycling it back to the producers. A simple marine food chain then might look like this. The top predator, trophic level number 4, is a herring. Herring fish eat level 3, carnivorous zooplankton. The carnivorous zooplankton eat trophic level 2, herbivorous zooplankton, and herbivorous zooplankton eat level number 1. Photoplankton, which is a type of autotroph. In marine food chains, energy transfer is not very efficient. Photoplankton utilize only about 1% of the energy available from the sun. Between 70 and 90% of the energy made by producers or eaten by heterotrophs is used in their bodies or expelled as waste. This leaves only 10 to 30% that is retained in the body's biomass and available for consumers at the next highest trophic level. Thus, the biomass at each trophic level is controlled by the efficiency of the energy transfer. At the lowest trophic level, animals will generally have high biomass, and there will be lots of small producers. At the highest trophic level, animals will generally have low biomass, and there will be only a few large animals. Now, let's expand our simple food chain into a food web. In this web, a herring is no longer a trophic 4 predator. There is a bigger fish, a tuna, that eats the herring. But there's even a bigger animal that eats the tuna, and that is...
us.
Yes, and there's something else from the seas that will even eat us.
Sharks.
Correct. A food web is more complex than a food chain. And then there are gigantic animals like whale sharks and baleen whales that are herbivores and only eat plankton. But let's focus for a few moments on us. What are the implications of trophic levels for the fish we eat? Well, looking at the fish harvest worldwide, 88% of the fish we catch are fish with fins. 8% are shellfish, and 4% are crustaceans. Fish caught in the open ocean, such as tuna, are high-level predators on an inefficient food chain. Fish caught in coastal waters, such as cod, herring, and haddock, are at the top end of shorter, more efficient food chains. This is because there's a high level of phytoplankton, so consumers expend less energy catching food. These fish, then, provide more energy and better nutrition for us. In upswelling areas off the west coasts of America and Africa, the fish are even healthier. Here they are small, very efficient food chains, and the fish are small, fast-growing, eat lots of phytoplankton, and travel in dense schools. Two examples of such fish are anchovies and sardines.
The first question is, what aspect of marine food chains does the professor mainly discuss? Look at the answer options. Food webs, energy transfer, trophic relationships, seafood harvesting. We've just talked about food webs, food chains, and trophic relationships in the first part of our video. As you learned from the lecture, trophic relationships refer to the relationships between producers and consumers. Simply put, it's about whether animals are autotrophs, organisms that can create their own energy and form the base of the food chain, or heterotrophs, organisms that cannot produce their own food and must obtain energy and nutrients by consuming other organisms, such as herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, and so on. These are all words we've just discussed. Trophic relationships is the correct answer here. At the beginning of the lecture, the professor says, "Today, we're going to talk about trophic relationships in marine food chains and webs." Then continues discussing trophic relationships, explaining the concepts of autotrophic plankton, heterotrophs, food chains, and food webs. However, the main focus remains trophic relationships, even though option A, food webs, might seem tempting to choose. Question 2. According to the professor, why is herring healthier for us than tuna? Herring is a small, silver-colored fish that looks like this. Now, go to your notes and check what you've written about it. Think about the answer, then continue watching. The right answer is A. Herring have a more efficient food chain. In the lecture, the professor explains the fish caught in coastal areas, such as herring, are at the top of shorter and more efficient food chains. This means there is less energy loss between trophic levels compared to fish like tuna, which are high-level predators in longer, less efficient food chains, because energy is lost at each trophic level. The shorter the food chain, the more energy is retained, making herring a healthier and more energy-efficient choice for humans. Let's look at the relevant part of the lecture. This information was given near the very end. The professor said, fish caught in the open ocean, such as tuna, are high-level predators on an inefficient food chain. Fish caught in coastal areas, such as cod, herring, and haddock, are at the top end of shorter, more efficient food chains. This is because there is a high density of phytoplankton, so consumers expend less energy catching food. These fish then provide more energy and better nutrition for us. So herring is better for us than tuna because it comes from a more efficient food chain. Question 3. In the lecture, the professor describes a simple marine food chain. Which of the following is mentioned in the lecture as part of this chain? The lecturer said, a simple marine food chain then might look like this. The top predator, trophic level number 4, is a herring. Herring fish eat level 3, carnivorous zooplankton. The carnivorous zooplankton eat trophic level number 2, herbivorous zooplankton. And herbivorous zooplankton eat level number 1, phytoplankton, which is a type of autotroph. So the parts of the chain are top predators, like herring, carnivorous zooplankton, herbivorous zooplankton, and phytoplankton. This means the right answer is C, phytoplankton. We already know how whales and sharks look. Now codfish, or cod, looks like this. Question 4. How does the professor introduce the topic of seafood? The professor starts the lecture by making a joke about being on a seafood diet. He sees food and eats it. He says, "How many of you like seafood?" Most of you. So do I. In fact, I'm on a seafood diet. I see food, I eat it. The professor follows up with, "Get it? Haha, okay." But seriously, folks, we can see that he tells a joke, so B is correct. Finally, the last question is, why does the professor say this? And then there are gigantic animals like whale sharks and baleen whales that are herbivores and only eat plankton. This question might be more challenging because you need to understand why the professor is stating this. The professor is saying this to show that marine food webs are more complex than simple food chains. He mentions large animals like whale sharks and baleen whales that are herbivores and feed on plankton to illustrate that not all large animals are top predators. Usually, the answer will be very close to the statement itself. In the previous information block, the professor was discussing food chains. Now, in this block, he introduces the idea of food webs. He says, a food web is more complex than a food chain. And then there are gigantic animals like whale sharks and baleen whales that are herbivores and only eat plankton. So food webs are more complex, and he illustrates this with the statement we are asked about. This means that D is correct, to highlight complexity. If you look at the transcript of the lecture, you'll see a lot of new words that we learned in the first part of this video. They are food chains, food webs, trophic relationships, marine ecosystems, autotrophic plankton, autotrophs, heterotrophic organisms, herbivores, carnivores, predators, omnivores, heterotrophic bacteria, herring, carnivorous zooplankton, herbivorous zooplankton, whale sharks, baleen whales, shellfish, crustaceans, coastal areas, and cod. You can use the daily dictation website to build your listening skills. Or, if you need more listening practice, feel free to check our LinguaTOEFL app. You can listen to conversations and lectures, work on full reading passages, drill reading question types, study vocabulary, and have your writing and speaking assessed by AI.
That's the end of today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Now that you have a better understanding of the TOEFL listening section, it's time to practice. Make sure to complete at least 2 to 3 listening tests before your exam. Each time you practice, analyze your performance and reflect on why you made certain mistakes. As always, I wish you all a stellar TOEFL score. Until next time, bye-bye!